This isn't high school debate, sweetheart. This is military science. Maybe stick to something you can handle, like student government. The nervous snickers of 24 ROTC cadets filled the sterile university lecture hall, a wave of second-hand embarrassment and relief that they weren't the target. Professor Caldwell, a retired colonel whose booming voice was his primary teaching tool, smirked with satisfaction. He stood over the large tabletop map, a Napoleon in a tweed jacket, basking in the cheap authority he commanded. The subject of his condescension, a freshman named Evelyn Reed, offered no reaction. She didn't flush with anger or shrink in her seat. Her focus remained entirely on the map, a complex wargaming simulation of a hostage extraction. She simply gave a slow, single blink, her expression as neutral as polished stone. To Caldwell, and to everyone else, she was utterly unremarkable. She wore her standard-issue uniform without flair, her brown hair pulled back in a simple, functional ponytail. She was the girl who sat in the back, her notebooks filled with meticulous, small-print annotations, her silence mistaken for timidity. But the general, observing the mandatory training session from a small screen 1,000 miles away, didn't see a timid freshman. He saw the posture. He saw the unnerving stillness in her hands, the way her eyes tracked the tactical problem, not with academic interest, but with a deep, predatory familiarity. He saw the ghost of 1,000 similar maps, not in a classroom, but in the whispering quiet of a forward operating base. The other cadets saw a girl, the general saw a weapon on safety. He leaned closer to his screen, his suspicion solidifying into cold certainty. Caldwell continued his lecture, his voice dripping with condescending paternalism as he deliberately dismantled Evelyn's quietly offered suggestion. She had pointed to a small, seemingly insignificant courtyard on the simulation map, suggesting it as an unconventional helicopter landing zone. A fantasy approach, Caldwell had scoffed. Completely exposed, tactically naive. The kind of idea a civilian would come up with, he reveled in the moment, using her perceived ignorance as a lesson for the others on the dangers of amateur thinking. He was building his lecture on the foundation of her public humiliation, cementing his status as the gatekeeper of wisdom. Evelyn, however, wasn't listening to him anymore. Her head was tilted at a barely perceptible angle, her gaze fixed not on the map, but on the large window overlooking the main campus quad. She made a single, tiny annotation in her notebook, a circle around the courtyard she had proposed, and then closed the book with a soft, final click. Her body language shifted. The quiet observer was gone, replaced by something else, something coiled and alert. She was no longer a student in a classroom, she was an operator assessing a threat matrix. Her stillness was no longer passive, it had become the profound calm that precedes decisive, violent action. This was the shift from theory to practice, and the air in the room, thick with arrogance and cheap laughter moments before, began to crackle with an unspoken, terrifying tension. The lesson was indeed about to begin, but Professor Caldwell would not be the one giving it. The first indication that the world had tilted on its axis was not a sound, but a vibration. A deep, resonant hum that started in the soles of their feet and climbed its way up their spines. Then came the campus-wide alert system, its synthesized voice cracking over the PA with an unnatural urgency. This is not a drill. Initiate lockdown procedures. Shelter in place. This is not a drill, panic bloomed instantly. Cadets exchanged wide-eyed, fearful glances. Professor Caldwell, his bluster evaporating in the face of a real crisis, began barking contradictory orders, his theoretical authority crumbling into noise. But through the chaos, Evelyn Reed moved with a chilling and deliberate grace. She was a vortex of absolute calm. While others fumbled with their phones, she was already at the window, her eyes scanning the quad not with fear, but with cold, professional appraisal. Her hands, which had been so still, moved with a practiced economy that was mesmerizing. From her seemingly standard-issue backpack, she retrieved a small, matte-black satellite phone, a piece of hardware that had no business being in a freshman's possession. Her actions were a silent, damning refutation of everything Caldwell had assumed. She wasn't a girl playing soldier, she was a soldier who had been patiently playing the role of a girl. Her call was brief, a staccato burst of technical jargon that was utterly alien to the academic setting. Scimitar is active. I say again, scimitar is active. Location verified. Execute Phoenix Protocol. Caldwell, who had finally noticed her strange behavior, started to move toward her, his face a mask of furious confusion. Cadet, what in God's name do you think you're? His words were swallowed by the sound. The low hum had escalated into a deafening, rhythmic roar that shook the very foundations of the building. Outside the window, the sky darkened. Two MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters, stripped of all markings, their skins the color of a moonless night, materialized over the campus. They were not the lumbering birds of the National Guard, they were the lean, predatory wolves of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. One held a high, circling orbit, a sentinel in the sky, while the other began an impossibly precise descent. It fell toward the exact courtyard Caldwell had dismissed as a fantasy, its rotor wash tearing at the ancient oak trees, a maelstrom of controlled power. The classroom went dead silent. Every single person, including the now paralyzed Colonel Caldwell, was pressed against the glass. The Black Hawk landed with a final, gentle sigh, its side door sliding open to reveal the dark, menacing silhouettes of operators in full combat gear. They were Delta Force. And they were all looking directly at the classroom window. The lecture hall door didn't open, it was thrust inward with such force that it slammed against the wall. The figure who strode in was not campus security. He was a 3-star general, his uniform so crisp it seemed to cut the air, his chest a constellation of ribbons that told the story of a lifetime at war. It was General Theron, commander of the entire Regional Joint Task Force, a man whose picture hung on the wall of the ROTC building. He ignored Caldwell completely, his gaze sweeping the room until it locked onto Evelyn. The general's entire demeanor shifted. The hard edge of command softened, replaced by something else, a deference, a professional courtesy reserved only for a very specific type of peer. He didn't see a cadet. He saw an asset of immense, almost sacred value. Warrant Officer Reed, he said, his voice a low, urgent rumble that carried across the stunned silence. I apologize for the intrusion. We have a situation. It was at that moment that Professor Caldwell's world, built on the comfortable bedrock of his assumptions, finally shattered into a million pieces. The name, the title, Warrant Officer, it was impossible. It made no sense. This was a freshman, a girl he had belittled not 10 minutes ago. Caldwell, sputtering, took a half-step forward, his mind struggling to reconcile the girl in front of him with the title the general had used. General, with all due respect, what is going on? This is Cadet Reed, she's a first-year. General Theron turned his head slowly, and the look in his eyes was like the Arctic North, cold, vast, and unforgiving. It froze Caldwell where he stood. Colonel, the general's voice was dangerously quiet, each word a perfectly polished stone of authority. You are addressing Chief Warrant Officer for Evelyn Reed. Her service record is classified at a level that, frankly, you are not cleared to even know exists. But allow me to provide you with the operative summary. Unit, Joint Special Operations Command, Special Mission Unit Designation Classified. Combat hours, over 4,000, the majority of which were logged in unacknowledged theaters of operation. Primary skill set, Lead Technical Analyst and Strategic Mission Planner for Tier 1 Counterterrorism Operations. She is in your freshman seminar, Colonel, because she is on a mandatory decompression and educational sabbatical following her last deployment. She was supposed to be left alone. He turned back to Evelyn, who was already slinging her backpack over her shoulder. He gave a short, formal nod, the highest form of respect one professional can give another. The package is live. They need your eyes on it, ma'am. Evelyn's reply was simple, devoid of any emotion except focus. Understood, sir. As Evelyn walked toward the door, the world seemed to part for her. The hardened Delta operators who had been waiting in the hallway, men who were themselves legends, instinctively stepped aside, their posture shifting to one of escort. They fell into formation behind her not as guards, but as an honor guard, following their queen onto the chessboard. The story of what happened in that lecture hall did not leak, it exploded. It tore through the ROTC battalion first, then the university, then onto encrypted military forums and message boards where it was dissected with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The legend of the freshman ghost was born, a cautionary tale whispered from drill sergeants to cocky young lieutenants about the dangers of judging a book by its cover. The small, unassuming courtyard outside the lecture hall was unofficially christened Reed's Landing, a landmark of institutional humility. Caldwell's classroom became a kind of shrine, the window a portal to the moment when theory was brutally, and beautifully, humbled by reality. It was a story that served as a powerful reminder that in the world of quiet professionals, the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you notice last. Professor Caldwell was a changed man. The public and undeniable shattering of his arrogance left him hollowed out, but in that emptiness, something new began to grow. The next day, he stood before his class, and for the first time, his voice was not a boom but a quiet, measured tone of contrition. He offered a full, unreserved apology, not just for his treatment of Evelyn, but for the culture of assumption he had fostered. He confessed his own failure, using it as the most powerful teaching tool he had ever possessed. His entire curriculum changed. He stopped teaching regulations and started teaching wisdom. He taught his cadets to listen, to observe, to respect the silence, and to understand that true expertise rarely, if ever, announces itself. Weeks later, an encrypted email arrived on the ROTC battalion commander's desk. It was from an untraceable server, but the signature was unmistakable. It was a detailed, 17-page analysis of the very tabletop simulation from that day, written by Evelyn from some far-flung, classified location. It identified 3 more critical vulnerabilities Caldwell had missed and offered brilliantly simple solutions for each. There was no gloating, no, I told you so, it was just a quiet, professional continuation of her duty, a final, silent lesson on what it truly means to serve. A year later, the ROTC program at that university was unrecognizable. It had become a center of excellence, known not for its rigid adherence to doctrine but for its cultivation of critical, unconventional thinking. Cadets were taught that the greatest weapon they could possess was not a rifle, but a humble and open mind. The story of Chief Warrant Officer 4 Evelyn Reed had become institutional folklore, the foundational myth told to every new class on their first day. It was the story of how a quiet girl in the back of the room taught a retired colonel and an entire battalion the true meaning of strength. On the wall of Caldwell's lecture hall, a single framed photograph now hung. It was an aerial shot, taken by a student from a nearby dormitory window, showing 2 matte black helicopters sitting on the pristine campus lawn like creatures from another world. There was no plaque, no explanation. None was needed. It served as a permanent, silent monument to the day that assumptions died. It was a testament to the fact that the most profound legacies are often unintentional, born from a single, undeniable moment of truth that forces the world to see with new eyes. True legacy isn't what is carved into a monument, it is the change that is carved into a culture. It is the silent, positive shockwave that emanates from a single act of quiet competence, forcing everyone it touches to re-evaluate their own certitudes. Evelyn Reed never sought fame or recognition. All she ever sought was the successful completion of her mission. But by simply being who she was, a consummate professional hidden in plain sight, she fundamentally altered the course of dozens of future officers. She taught them that respect is not a function of rank, but a debt paid to demonstrated excellence. She proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of unwavering focus. And above all, she cemented the timeless truth that the most powerful voice in any room is rarely the loudest. It is the quiet, calm, and prepared voice that speaks only when it has something to say, a voice backed not by volume, but by the undeniable weight of what it knows and what it can do. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over ignorant arrogance and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.